All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Zambrano, and I'm part of the marketing group here at Touchlab. Thank you for joining us today. We're super excited because we're going to be talking to one of our engineers, Russell Wolf, who's also on the Zoom here. And the topic for today is one that's pretty important to the Kotlin Multiplatform ecosystem. And it's the topic is libraries, open source libraries. How do you launch them? How do you maintain them? And we're excited to speak to Russell today because he has actually launched one of the earlier libraries to the ecosystem. That library is called Multiplatform Settings. I'll drop a link in the chat in a second here, so in case you're interested in learning more about it. But obviously that's the purpose of today's Touchlab share, is to kind of go in depth with him around that particular library. So very similar format as last time. If you have questions, please drop them as they come to your mind in the chat, and we'll try to get to some of those questions towards the end. But with that, we'll jump into today's episode of Touchlab Share. So Russell, if you could just kind of start off with a little bit of an introduction on yourself and just give everyone on the call some background, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, if you don't know me, I'm Russell. I do multi-platform mobile development, and I wrote a library. Been with Touchlab for a couple months. Been in the KNP world for a little over 2 years now. And yeah, I guess we'll get to that.
Great. And where are you located today?
Oh, sure. I'm in Boston.
Boston, sweet, cool. All right. So let's kind of start at the beginning. How did you decide, Russell, to start to work on a library for Kotlin Multiplatform? Can you give us the backstory and the progress to date?
Sure. So I started in. It's funny actually because the 2-year anniversary of the library was a couple weeks ago. I had a tweet out about that. So I've been doing a bunch of kind of like retrospecting in general in my head. But the story actually starts about a year before that. I've been in mobile consulting for a while, primarily doing native Android apps. But the company I was with wanted to try a React Native sort of as an experiment with one client in early 2017. And I ended up on that project and wasn't that big a fan. There certainly were some efficiency gains. There were interesting things about the framework, but I found a lot of it frustrating. But it got me thinking a lot about kind of what do I want in a multi-platform framework and a cross-platform framework. And around that time was when the very first Kotlin native tech preview came out. So I started watching that at the corner of my eye, as well as a couple other things. That was around when I did some searching. I came across Doppel. That was when I first kind of knew who Touchlab was. But I was just kind of that was just kind of all in the back of my mind for a while until a year or so later, early 2018, Kotlin Native had kind of reached the point where it could plug into the rest of Kotlin Multiplatform, and you could actually start to build apps with it where you were sharing code. So I'd been watching stuff for a while. I wanted to kind of jump into trying something out. So we had a starter project, template project at the company that I was at. And I did kind of a proof of concept translating of that into Kotlin Multiplatform. And one of the things that app did was save some things to shared preferences. Part of the story that I skipped was I'd been watching the development of multi-platform stuff in general, and paying some attention to some of Kevin's blogging and talks and stuff. And in a couple of his things, he put out a note that hey, by the way, we're going to need libraries, and it's kind of a great way to jump into the open source community. And that really kind of spoke to me. So I had this thing, this sample project I was building, and I was thinking about what's something you componentize. And preferences kind of seemed like an obvious way to go. And like as I was doing that, they put out a version of Kotlin native that you could actually like publish Maven dependencies. So you could actually like publish and consume the library in the same way that you're used to on the Android side. And like within a month or so of that, I put the first version out, I think.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite part of the story. I think the fact that everything kind of comes full circle with Kevin putting out that call to libraries, and now you're here. But we'll get to that a little bit later.
Sure.
So kind of explain to us what your library actually does.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mentioned like shared preferences is the Android API. But basically it's simple key value storage. So you have maybe it's like a last updated time or like a username or like some value that you want to persist in your app across restarts. But it's not so complicated that you need like a database for it. You just want to like save one value with a name. It lets you do that. And so early on, it was like shared preferences is the Android API that does that. User defaults is the iOS API that does that. So early on, it was kind of those two. That's what I kind of like built the initial API around, and then over time, I've added other platforms as well.
Okay. So what's the current status of the library? I know not too long ago, maybe like a week ago, you released a new version. Can you just kind of walk us through like what the current status of the library is?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I just put out version 0.6 a little over a week ago, which has a couple of neat new features. One of them was native Windows support. So a couple people have been asking me, like I started on the mobile side, but a couple people have been asking about like adding desktop support and stuff like that. So there was a PR for that from kind of last fall that did kind of like the early work, and then I was able to bring that over the line. On kind of more the mobile side, it finally adds some stuff that had been on my to-do list for a while around thread safety on the iOS side. So most of these user defaults APIs are kind of like you're generally just kind of like doing a pass through, and so like it doesn't matter what thread you call it on because it's all being handled on the iOS side anyway, and the Kotlin native runtime doesn't come into play. The exception to that is the update listeners. So previously, if you like set a callback, so you say, or like what the API is you can set a callback so that when something changes, you get a notification instead of needing to check for it yourself. And that, if you've done that on the iOS side from a background thread, or if you'd updated something from a background thread after setting the listener, that would cause a crash. So I've added some new checks to make sure that doesn't happen. Which is it's opt-in because it also forces things to freeze, which you might not be expecting, but you have the ability to do that now. Also added some stuff around the sort of configuration ergonomics. So historically, I've built the API in a way that's kind of tuned towards interop. So like you might have you might be using, like you're using this in your shared code, but you might also have platform specific code where you want to talk to shared preferences or user defaults or local storage on JavaScript or whichever API. So you're forced to, in your platform code, kind of pass your own delegate at initialization. And I've added this new module that will do that for you from common if you don't care about that configuration.
Got it. Great. Yeah, and I've also linked to a blog post by Russell that kind of walks through all those latest updates that he just presented and talked about. So if you're interested in kind of seeing the library in its full state, the GitHub link is there. And then we also have his blog post that kind of goes into more detail around some of those latest changes. All right, let's switch gears a little bit here. Walk us through your process for, incorporating feedback and requests from the folks that are actually using your library. How has that influenced the roadmap, and like what are some of the major roadmap milestones that you've hit along the way, and how do you kind of listen to the community to make sure that you're building something that they want to see?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, it's always a bit tough because like feedback doesn't always come very quickly. So like, especially early on, I was doing a lot of just kind of like making guesses based on my needs. So like I'm a mobile developer, so I started with mobile platforms. Adding something on JavaScript was kind of an obvious next step. Like another kind of like client side thing essentially that has a similar API. But so the kind of general process I've used is like I have kind of like some thoughts based on my experience, and I see kind of what feedback I get, and that comes from things like pull requests and GitHub issues. People occasionally reach out to me either on Slack or on Twitter, and say like, hey, by the way, like it'd be nice if XYZ or can you add XYZ, or this thing doesn't work for me for some reason. So yeah, I try to be, I'm just kind of open to getting that kind of feedback.
Have you ever gotten feedback from people in person at conferences or meetups or anything like that?
Yeah. No, I've gotten some of that too. Yeah.
What's it like meeting people who use your library?
It's nice. It's like, yeah, it's kind of neat to make that connection because it's not, like it's not always easy to, like, I don't have a lot of metrics around usage in the end. But yeah, every time something goes to me and it's like, hey, by the way, like I use your thing, like thanks, is a nice feeling. And it like it's gives you that kind of extra connection too.
Could you just walk us through like some of the API design and architecture decisions you've made along the way? Like what have you learned? What decisions paid off? Maybe what decisions didn't pay off? Just kind of walk us through the design process of building something that is, is for the community and meant to be open source.
Sure. Yeah, and it's these are all kind of interesting concerns because like the way that you think about API design in a library is different than the way you do for an app. Like for an app, you're concerned with I have my use cases, like I know what I need to do like for me right now, and I have the ability to like change that over time. But for a library, you care about being like you're more general, like you're it's not just your own use cases, it's kind of the use cases of whoever is out there using it. And you have more requirements around like you need to kind of keep your API stable. So like one so there's a couple of things that I did early on that I like would do differently now. So some of which I corrected more than others, but like one of them is around the expect and actual keywords. So the big kind of new piece that multi-platform adds to single platform Kotlin is this concept of expect and actual declarations. So you can say in my common code, I expect that this class or this function or whatever will be there. And then in my platform code, I say this is the actual implementation for that platform. And this is like, it's one of the first things that you see in kind of most samples and tutorials and stuff. So it's kind of like the shiny new toy that you want to play with right away. And it has, like, it's very useful. It definitely has lots of use cases, but it's kind of easy to overuse it sometimes too. So like my first pass at the settings API was all just like expect class settings, like expect fun, put in, get in, et cetera, et cetera. And that works perfectly well, but it has limitations. So if you want to say swap out a different limitation in your test code, expect actual doesn't let you do that. And so what I ended up doing over time is converted that to an interface, like the same way that you would in traditional JVM Kotlin. So it puts a little bit more on the user who then needs to kind of supply their implementation, but it also gives them the ability to kind of supply different implementation. And the other thing that enables that kind of happened more recently is I can publish that interface now to platforms that don't have an existing implementation yet. So if you use a spec actual, you can't kind of leave that empty. But with an interface, you can. So Multiplatform Settings now pushes the interfaces to every available Kotlin platform. So people have the ability, if they're using a platform that I don't have an implementation for yet, they can kind of provide their own. And hopefully that also kind of eases the legwork needed if they want to kind of supply that back. If they want to say like, here's an implementation that you could use that you could kind of add to the library, that's easier to do now.
Do you think there was anything inherently about KeyValue Settings that made it a good candidate for a multi-platform library?
I think like it definitely helps that most of the APIs are kind of fairly similar across different platforms. So like you're going to have like essentially like sets and gets that have some key and some value. The major differences are around like what types are supported and around like how you handle when that value is not there. And that was another kind of like choice that I made early on that I probably would have done differently now is I queued very closely to the Android Share Preferences API, which you always provide it with the default value that it will return to you when the thing is not there. And that's different than what iOS does, and that's different than what certain other platforms do, where they might like return null instead. And probably I would have used, like if I thought about it a little bit more early on, like that might have been a nicer default. And I ended up adding kind of extra get or null calls now that do that. But the ergonomics are like, it's just like a couple more characters than I'd like, I guess. I probably would have made that to default if I thought about them early on. But it's like, it's funny given like, I started with it because like these were things that seemed kind of very similar across platform, but the more you dig into it and the more kind of other platforms you add, the more you see kind of what little differences there are. And yeah, like you have to think about that.
All right. I want to open it up. Are there any questions from the folks on the call? Feel free to type them in, or just unmute yourselves and maybe introduce yourself and ask the question. But I'll give a couple. Like, anyone want to ask something or chime in? We got, yeah.
I know you have more.
John, John has a question. Go ahead.
How you doing? Hi, Russell. Thanks for this. Is very interesting. I was just curious if you've anything up next in terms of libraries that you're looking at, or anything that you're planning on working on.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't have much concrete in the way of like new libraries that I'm personally working on. I have thoughts about like things I'd like to add to settings. So like I've done some partial work around a like a desktop Linux implementation to try to hit all of the at least like major native platforms. And like there's a couple other just like little configuration and other things. Like I'm right now it's publishing just to JCenter, and it'd be nice to get that on Maven Central. A couple other things. I've kind of prototyped some integrations with some of the Kotlin X libraries. So like a serialization integration that would like you could take like any arbitrary class and serialize it to your settings store rather than to JSON or something, and like some coroutines flow integrations with the update listeners. So some version of some of those will come at some point.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Well, the last thing I'll say is, we are continuing to work on new libraries. So Sam, who's also on the call, just released something over last week, and I'll drop a link into it in the chat here. But it got picked up by Android Weekly, so we're excited about that. But the library is called Kermit. So continue to kind of watch what we're up to next, because I'm sure we'll have a session around that at some point. But if you're interested in some of the work that we're doing there, that's a new library that we just launched. Yeah,
and that's around logging specifically, if people are curious to look at it.
great. So that concludes our session for today. Tomorrow, we're excited to have an outside guest. If you've kind of seen the registration page, we're going to be joined by Ahmed from Kareem. They're a ride-hailing and service and beyond that service the Middle East and some parts of Africa as well. So we're really excited to talk to him. And that conversation is going to focus on some of the recent explorations they've done around multi-threading. So that'll be the first part of the discussion, and he'll kind of walk us through what he's learned in that experience. But then also, because they have put Kotlin Multiplatform in production at such a scale, we really want to learn from them and hear from them around their experiences putting KMP into production and what those lessons have been, and advice for other teams that are looking to also do this. So please join us tomorrow. And once again, that's Ahmed from Kareem. He's our the engineering lead over at Kareem. So we're really excited to have that conversation. And if you have any feedback or thoughts on the series up to date, definitely email us, tweet us. The email is hello@touchlab.co. And we'll see you tomorrow. So thank you for joining today. We really appreciate it. And Russell, thanks a lot for walking us through that. We're really excited to share that story.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.